Welcome to the Red Team Draft Podcast. This is episode 12, and I'm hosting this week Eustacchio Raulli in place of Alex West. He's getting a DNP for the so-called cold weather in North Carolina, 43 degrees, while we're up here in 0 degree weather, 1 degree weather, Connor and I. With us this week, we have Connor Harr. How are you doing today, Connor?
I'm good. We miss you, Alex.
And we also have with us Josh Earl. How are you, Josh?
I'm doing well. I'm warmer than Alex right now, so I got that going for me.
That's good. And we also have a guest with us this week. We are starting to cycle in some of the other members of Red Team Scouting, and this week we have with us Levi Wenrich. And how are you doing, Levi?
Hey, guys. Doing well. Appreciate you having me on, and excited to get started.
Great to have you on, Levi. So this week, our discussion is going to center around two of the more unique prospects in this draft class, Barrett and Bol Bol. So we're going to break down their games. We'll start with RJ and just go through and see how they make their impact, and then talk about what our outlook is for them, what we see them doing in the NBA. So let's start with RJ Barrett. And let me toss it to you, Connor. Give us just an overview of who RJ is.
Yeah, so RJ Barrett came to Duke as the number one prospect in the class, I believe. Very good scorer, tremendous finisher around the rim. Sort of has a very debatable game right now at the NBA level, projecting wise, on sort of just a stats based, box score based performance and sort of a team value performance. I think a lot of that stems from his on ball traits and his off ball traits as well. So starting out with his on ball, what do you think about his on ball, Josh?
He's got a lot of good on-ball skills. He's got a pretty good handle for somebody his size, good ability to kind of combine dribble moves and utilization of, change of pace dribbles, hesitations, change of direction. He can also finish really well on ball. Like you noted, one of the most interesting things about him to me is his body control, which is something we'll touch on a little bit later, but it allows him to kind of get off a lot of shots around and sometimes over and occasionally through, and sometimes just somehow in the presence of defenders, often a lot of help defenders. He's really a strong on-ball slashing threat on the college level, given his handle, his body control, and his ability to kind of maneuver around defenders.
Levi, you did a great video about RJ about a week or so ago. What sticks out to you about his on-ball game?
Hey, well, first of all, I appreciate the kind words. Thank you very much. With Barrett, he's an interesting player because he's a ton of fun to watch at times and then extremely frustrating in others, and oftentimes in the very same play. So with him, I think you guys nailed it with he's got a pretty good handle for his size. He does a good job of getting to spots. He struggles with decision-making once he's in those spots. So, when I watch him play, I see a good athlete, strong slashing threat, but the point where he really struggles at most is what to do once he gets in the paint. It tends to be his tunnel vision really takes over, and from there it can get pretty ugly pretty quick. But Connor, did you have any further thoughts going on?
Yeah, so to me, I think you really spoke on something that I really liked, was where specifically talking about his passing value. I think that you're absolutely correct, is once he gets into the lane, he tends to be a little bit shot oriented, but he also tends to, where your decision making comes into play, like you said, where he sort of forces passes that don't really need to be there or makes inaccurate passes. it's always really good to sort of see the weak side corner, especially projecting the next level, but he does have a tendency to force the weak side corner. Other than that, I think ball handling, like we've hit on, good handle for his size. Handle's a little high to me. I think he's just generally upright, which isn't really a huge deal, but I think sometimes that hurts him in transition, really, where he tends to have some live ball turnovers with his handle, just from it being so high. But other than that, I think I really like the shooting off the dribble, and not necessarily just about his future value. And to me, I seem to be in the minority where I think that RJ still has an avenue of being an off ball player if you can kind of instill that mentality in his head. And I think he has a lot of valuable traits that we'll get into later. But it goes back to one of the things that Cole brought up on the podcast that we did, where he said that you're not going to change a guy's mentality. And if you're not going to change a guy like RJ's mentality, then you're willing to bank on the on ball traits, which I'm not necessarily as high on, just because of his overall finishing too. I mean, it's a great part of his game. He finishes with great body control, but he also doesn't finish with his right hand at all. He tends to force shots going to his left, and also going off the dribble like that, he doesn't have a large amount of speed. He's really good at angling, and like Levi said, he gets to his spots really well. But that's something that worries me at the next level, is if he doesn't have that blow by speed in the half court, how is he going to be able to convert on such high usage plays? But I think Josh wanted to say something else about his passing, so we could throw that back over to him.
Yeah, thanks, Connor. I think what's both fascinating and frustrating with RJ is you see these flashes of like one or two possessions a game. He'll flash something really impressive where, you know, he actually makes the right decision when he's in that position. And there have been a couple of passes I've seen him make which are like high level passes, but you only see little glimpses of them. It's almost like the zoetrope effect. Like it's just fleeting little glimpses. And if you put them all together, you might see some semblance of like, okay, yeah, this could be something we could bank on the next level. But you know, it's those little flashes that both kind of intrigue you about him, but also frustrate you that, like, why don't you do this more consistently? And I think the passing is one of those things, and the decision making is definitely one of those things. Levi, did you have any other thoughts on the on ball stuff with RJ?
Yeah, just your comments on his passing jogged my memory a little bit here. The thing with him for me is that it's not so much that he's not a completely willing passer. It's that he makes survival passes and not scoring passes most of the time. So typically he'll get in the lane, draw help, and he's still thinking, at least from my perspective, score, score, score. And it's not until the point where it's like there's zero chance of a scoring angle created, and now he's firing a pass somewhere and hoping it just gets there. So really he does such a great job of drawing attention and help, but because he thinks so heavily about scoring first and last, it's very often survival passes and not scoring passes.
And that would be fine if he was more efficient of a scorer. Like Kevin Durant isn't really a pass first player, but he's incredibly efficient, and so it works. He can play like that. But RJ, his efficiency has only been his true shooting percentage is 53.2 right now. And so that's really not efficient enough for a lead scorer that's taking on that kind of usage. However, I did notice something interesting in the Virginia game recently. As you know, Trey Jones is out for Duke right now, and so they've had to adjust their play style a little bit. Now, early in the year, there was this dichotomy between RJ in transition and RJ in the half court. In transition, he was a terror. He finished at about 75% at the rim. But in the half court, he struggled more so because he was just driving into traffic, making bad decisions, and only finished at about 55% at the rim. But in the Virginia game, I think it was actually his most promising game of the year as far as actually getting all the way to the rim and finishing well within the half court setting. And I think there were a few factors that played into that, but perhaps most notably, Duke played without a point guard, really. They were playing bigger, switchable lineups, which meant that RJ was being guarded by smaller players a large portion of the game, that allowed him to use his size to consistently get to his spots in control and finish the playoff. So I think that sort of opened up to me a potential usage where he could be effective in that lead scorer role. Is if you pair him with another wing that can create, you don't really need to have a point guard on the floor. You can have these switchable lineups. You can have him where he's attacking these mismatches. And so it's just sort of opened up the possibility to me of a way that he could provide value on a winning team potentially. What do you guys think about that? Do you think he could work in that type of setting?
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely possible. I think that even though I'm probably lower on Barrett's on-ball skills than most, I still don't think it's insane for him to be a secondary creator. And if you pair somebody with him with his kind of self-creation ability or higher, more notably probably like a more dynamic pull-up threat kind of guy that can sort of space the floor a little bit more for him. I think that that's a very realistic offensive option, and I think that switchability is something that I always value so highly, is being able to do that at an efficient rate and being able to put 2 6'6", 6'5" plus guys on the floor and run them at your two guard spots with another wing would be pretty much a match made in heaven for stuff like that, assuming that the guys that you're pairing together do have unique traits both on and off the ball that could sort of complement each other, of course.
On that note, let's get into RJ's off-ball game a little bit. Um, uh, Josh, what do you think of his ability working away from the ball?
This is another aspect of the whole kind of tantalizing intriguingness of RJ, even though the decision making tied to it doesn't always work out well. One of the things I've been talking with Eustacchio about over the past month or two in regards to RJ is I actually think his shot mechanics in general are the best of Duke's big three, even though the outcomes aren't necessarily there. His shot mechanics, the being square to the basket, good 90-degree elbow, 90-degree wrist, solid extension. It's been a little flatter in more recent games. Not exactly sure what's going on there, but he's got good shot mechanics, and he doesn't tend to miss overly long or short, left or right. He tends to be fairly close to the rim. Usually it bounces off the rim if it's a miss. So I think the ability of him to be at least an off-the-catch type threat off ball in the right NBA lineup is there. And I think he can also, his mechanics also look good shooting off movement. He hasn't done a whole lot of that in the games that I've watched. But when he has, once again, his mechanics are good in that regard. He transitions into the shot well. The issue off ball is going to be more the ancillary complementary aspects of the team stuff. So is he constantly moving to open up better passing lanes? Is he constantly shifting to maintain the best amount of space when the ball isn't in his hands? Is he actually actively trying to set screens and actually connecting on those to help free up teammates? Those are things I haven't really seen a whole lot from him so far. And once again, it's kind of ancillary stuff. But when you're talking about team sport like basketball, that's the kind of stuff that really helps elevate a lineup. And I'm not so sure RJ can do that at this point, or is more accurately maybe willing to do that.
Connor or Levi, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I'm a lot higher on RJ's off-ball ability. I think recently, not as much now, pointing to the Virginia game without Trey Jones, but during the both the Wake game and the Florida State game, you saw him work off of more low usage stuff, like specifically a lot of DHOs where he would come down and he could knock down a one dribble pull up early in the offensive action for Duke, and he can definitely be somebody where we saw in the Florida State game where he can come off he can curl off a pin down, I'm sorry. And he has the shot creation ability and the handling fluidity to be able to knock down like a one dribble step back. And that's where I think the shooting off the dribble really ties in to his off ball ability, because he's never going to be a guy that's going to knock down 25 footers coming off complete forward momentum like a Kevin Herter, Kyle Korver, JJ Redick, one of those guys. He's not going to do that. But to me, that little off ball value is something that really helps him paired with his secondary creation value. And I think his ability to pass as well, like we've talked about, where his decisions aren't great. But I think if you can set up an action for him and you can limit him to saying, okay, you got to make this one read or you got to make this next read. And that's all he can do, but that's not necessarily a horrible thing. It's something that he can do because of his decisiveness and how well he can sort of make passing reads in the flow of an offense, not necessarily improvised on his own. So I think that he does have a lot more off-ball value than most people think, but I just think the actions need to be called for him more than him just improvising it on his own. So, Levi, did you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, so I'm in complete agreement here with Josh on his mechanics. He has a pretty fluid looking shot, really. I mean, he has a slight dip on his catch, but it's pretty straightforward and smooth, and he shoots it obviously without hesitation when you watch him play. The thing for me is that right now he's shooting 31% from three, and if you watch him and see the type of perimeter shots he gets, because of the attention his teammates draw, he really gets standstill, wide open kickouts. So it's not so much that he's only shooting 31%, it's that he's only shooting 31% in that situation where it's very little off the movement. It's really standstill, rhythm jumpers. But I agree with his mechanics. I think there's really no reason that a substantial improvement couldn't be there in the future. And for me, I see him this is one of two things that's really going to be key for him in order to reach his potential in the league. I think that his perimeter shooting, just to be substantial or just to be league average even, will really open up everything else he wants to do and what he brings to the table. And in fact, to me, the way I picture it is that the same way in year two that we're seeing De'Aaron Fox be able to hit three from 36%, his improvement has opened up the rest of his game. I could see that happening for Barrett 2-3 years down the road, where his 3-point percentage goes up a little bit more. You now have to respect that, and the rest of what he offers and brings to the table gets to take off, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, it would go a long way because he gets a ton of spot up possessions per synergy, 8.1 per 75 possessions. That's got to be among the highest volume in college basketball this year. And for such a high usage player, it's a fairly easy shot selection from three, but 31% is just not enough to make the defense step out on him. They're more afraid of him driving to the paint, and so they're willing to concede that shot. But if he's able to get up to the 36, 37% range on that type of volume, I mean, he could become a really effective secondary attacker out of those situations. So it's probably one of the more important skills in projecting him long term, whether that develops into a reliable threat or if it remains inconsistent as we've seen so far this season. Let's shift gears now and talk about the other side of the ball, his defense. Levi, what sticks out to you on this end of the court?
For me, he has some tools. I think that he has some natural gifts really that he could use to his benefit. I don't think he always does. I think from what I've seen on film, he seems pretty lackadaisical, especially once his man gives up the ball. He can kind of relax a little bit, get out of his stance. It's hard to tell if it's partially due to, Duke's defensive scheme, but he seems to have either a ton of confidence in his team's rim protection, where he's not afraid to open up driving lanes, which who could blame him? I mean, they have some pretty talented athletes behind him, but at the same time, his defensive fundamentals and habits really aren't that solid. I don't think they're horrible. I think he has a lot to work with. I'm just curious how much of it is a lackadaisical mentality towards it at the collegiate level, and how much of it is, I don't even want to say inability. I would just say how much of it is just him, his defensive habits and fundamental skills are just a little bit poor, partially because he's been at the lower levels coming up so much of a better athlete than the large majority of competition he's played. With these athletic type of players, you generally don't see these bad habits till they get to the collegiate level, when they're seeing some athletes that are on their scale.
Josh, you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So I agree with Levi in that I think when he's on ball, like he's okay in terms of like he'll get into a solid stance. He'll usually have fairly active hands. He'll use relatively good positioning, other than the occasional, kind of. Here's the driving lane for you. Go see my buddy Zion that Levi mentioned. But I think that the big issue is his off-ball defense. I mean, he's smart enough basketball-wise to know to tag the roll man or to dig down on drives and that sort of thing. But he has the worst case of a fairly common freshman issue on off-ball defense. But he's got the worst case I've seen in a while of ball watching. When their man no longer has the ball, they kind of just zone out a little bit, watching what's going on ball, and then they get themselves put out of position to recover to their man if the ball does swing back to them. And it's one of those things where, like Levi mentioned, he's got some physical tools. He's got at least a decent enough grasp of certain team defensive concepts like the tag and the roll man and that sort of thing in place, but he just doesn't utilize them consistently enough. And so I agree with Levi in that I'm wondering how much of this is like a willingness effort type thing, or is it maybe like a focus type thing? And it'll be interesting to see how NBA teams kind of weight that in their forecast of him defensively on the NBA level. Connor, do you have any thoughts on RJ's defense?
Yeah, so you guys talked about a lot of stuff. I just want to hit on just like one or two on and off ball things real quick. On ball, I think both you guys, well, Levi first mentioned, and then Josh piggybacked on it, was his willingness to sort of give up driving lane. I think that stems from him specifically relying on too many hip turns when he's instead of sliding his feet. I think that he's pretty quick laterally when he wants to be, like Levi pointed to with his tools again, but he has a tendency to consistently turn his hips when he doesn't really need to. And that opens him up for a lot of change of directions, or if he doesn't have the same, if he doesn't have the recovery speed to get burnt at the next at the rim. So other than that, I think the on-ball stuff's pretty good. I think he does have a lot of potential. And then for the off-ball stuff, I think I agree with Josh in the most part. I think he generally gets the team defensive concepts. I'm a little lower on specifically his tagging. I think he's a little late on his tags at times, and just an overall level of almost disinterest to me, but I don't want to necessarily believe it's that, because I think he really does understand when to rotate, and I think he specifically most of the times looks at the guy that he needs to rotate to, or might even throw an arm out or sort of shade over there, but doesn't fully make the rotation and doesn't fully come onto the ball. So I think that that's something that needs to be worked out, but I think it's something that definitely can be worked out. With other freshmen, I think that people have the problem where they're so far behind that it's such a higher curve to learn, and it's such a short time to learn since you only have so many years to learn it, and the game's so much faster. So I think that he'll be able to learn in time, but it is going to take just a little bit of time for him to sort of not necessarily be a standout off ball guy, but to be pretty average, which I think is really all you're kind of hoping for.
What strikes me is, like, on offense, he's this aggressive attacking player. He plays with a high motor, but on the defensive end, that disappears. He's very passive. And Josh brought up his ball watching, and some players ball watch with an intent to jump a passing lane to get a steal or to try to make a help rotation. RJ is just watching the ball. He doesn't make a lot of plays. His block rate and steal rate are both 1.4%. And this is on a team that is number 2 in NCAA basketball in blocks, number 1 in steals. So it's not scheme related, those low numbers. It's just passivity on RJ's part. He's letting Zion, Trey, Cam make those big plays. And so that's going to be something he really has to work on moving forward, to be more actively engaged and make use of those athletic tools he has, because he has great tools. He just doesn't always choose to use them on that end of the court. However, one thing I do want to point out, I mean, defense is a weak spot for many primary scorers, primary creators. That's normal. The more a player does on one end, the less energy they have on the other. So there's sort of a balancing act there. But one thing that RJ does have that many primary creators don't is he has a good solid frame, 6'7". He's a switchable defender. So it's much easier to hide that type of player within the scheme of a team defense. And you see that with Duke this year. Duke has a great defense, despite the fact that RJ isn't always actively engaged. Because he's able to switch on to those variety of players, it isn't as big of a deal for them. It's harder to pick at that matchup. I mean, you really have to focus on drawing those switches and going after him. If you don't make that concerted effort, that defense isn't actually going to be too impactful to Duke overall. So that switchability, versatility gives him a leg up on some other primary creators. But again, he's not that great on that end. He's solid on ball, solid switching, but off ball, help and recovery, impact plays, he's really not offering a lot. Let's transition now we'll talk about his tools and his basketball IQ a little bit. Let's throw this to Connor first. What sticks out most to you about RJ from a tools and from an IQ perspective?
Okay, so from tools, I think you have to start out with him, his body control and how well he is able to absorb contact at the rim. And that stems from his frame, like you talked about, and being such a strong finisher. Overall, I think that he does have pretty good tools, like we've talked about. North-south speed, doesn't have a lot of burst specifically, but has a decent top speed, and you see that in transition when he's filling lanes in transition. And agility east-west, I talked about his lateral quickness really, and how he is really strong in that area. He just doesn't always apply it, and that's something that he's going to need to apply. And other than that, I think leaping, he's an okay leaper. I don't think there's a whole lot to measure there. I mean, he's still pretty much below the rim finisher at what, 6'7", 6'6". So I mean, it's not great, but it's definitely nothing that would hinder his game at all at any level. And then as far as the intelligence goes, We've briefly talked about his decision making as a passer, which is one of the things that stands out the most. Also, specifically, his court awareness and situational awareness on the defensive end of the floor. I think that he needs to sort of process stuff a little bit better and where he's out on the court at times, especially when making rotations. Other than that, I think that that's just like a pretty general overview. Josh, did you have anything real specific that you wanted to go in about his tools or intelligence?
Yeah, just to piggyback a little bit, like his body control is just insane. One of the best I've seen in a while. Makes great use of the Euro step and just kind of finds a way to kind of snakily sneak around and circumvent defenders and manage to get some sort of shot off or at least draw a foul or try to draw a foul. And then, the intelligence stuff, you already touched on the defensive issues. I will say he's very decisive. The second the ball touches his hands in a spot up, handoff, or off screen, he's doing something. That something is almost always looking for his own shot, mind you, but he is very decisive about it. He doesn't really, kind of hold the ball, let the defense get set in those situations, and then try to attack. If he has an advantage, he's going to attack. That plays into an issue I have with his decision making on ball, not just the, looking off of teammates and trying to shoot, but he has this maddening tendency to drive directly into the help defenders. Like the help defenders don't even necessarily have to shift over much to get in his way. He'll find them somehow. And I think part of that might be to date in his career, he's had a lot of success with his frame, with his handle, with his body control of being able to finish around, help defenders, draw fouls, that sort of thing. And I'm wondering if maybe it's a kind of awareness of, hey, this is like harder level of competition, and on the NBA level, it's going to be even worse. His body control is great. His handle's pretty good, like we mentioned, but going against better defenders in college and on the NBA level, that tendency to drive into help is going to be problematic, in my opinion. Levi, what are your thoughts?
I thought you guys nailed it in terms of both his physical tools and just kind of his basketball IQ. The thing that strikes me, the only thing I want to add to his physical tools is that it's a strange mentality he has, because it's almost as if whatever physical tools he has to offer gets substantially increased once he has the ball in his hands. So it's like, it's like his superhero formula, or putting his cape on or something. It's pretty funny because he gets a little bit faster end to end in transition. He gets a little bit quicker side to side, and just plays ultra aggressive, which is kind of the opposite that Eustacchio was bringing about on defense, which is he's a really intriguing and frustrating player at the same time. His decision-making, court awareness, to me is the part two of really the two hurdles he has for me to reach his potential are going to be his perimeter shooting capability and then his decision-making. And it's interesting enough because to me it almost kind of shows us, ideally he improves both of them, but it's almost really, does his career path go a little bit more on ball or off ball depending on one of those two things. Obviously, if he improves in both, he becomes really versatile and can be a great threat on the floor. For him, he could be a dynamic playmaker at times, and he has impressive vision in small spurts where he'll make a great skip pass just out of nowhere and hit a shooter right in the pocket and everything else. But then the vast majority of the time, he's forcing the issue. So when he lets the game come to him, he can be a really valuable offensive asset because he draws so much help. He draws so much attention with his scoring mindset. But the problem is it almost feels as if the bigger moment of the game, the more he tries to do it on his own. And the Gonzaga game really obviously stands out, I think, for everybody who ever saw that. Speaks to that a little bit. But his court awareness isn't as bad as it's there. The ability is there. The consistency is not. And so that's really all I have to add on that.
Great stuff. Let's shift now quickly to go over the hustle aspects of the game. What do you guys think of his motor overall?
I think he's a competitor. I think that it kind of speaks to why, again, one of your defensive points of why when he's on the ball, that's typically when his defense looks the best, because it's almost just like a one-on-one mano-a-mano situation where off the ball he could be lackadaisical. I think he's definitely a competitor to me. His motor, I wasn't overly impressed with. I think anything that puts him in an individual limelight, he will compete greatly in when he has the ball in his hands and when he's guarding the ball. Outside of that, and again, it could be because he has the ultimate confidence in his teammates to protect the rim and help side and help defensive rebound, but he doesn't really offer, in my eyes, much of value in those. I just don't see the effort to be there. And the physical tools, again, once the ball's out of his hands, tend to kind of go away because he just loafs around quite a bit. But to me, the biggest thing in our hustle section is just his transition offense. I think that's his strongest weapon in my eyes right now, is that when he gets the ball on the open floor, he's pretty dynamic and he can be pretty special. So that'll be fun, I think, for him to watch. And you have to think that in half-court scenarios with better spacing at the pro level, he can be a little bit more dynamic in the half-court even than he is now.
Yeah, it's the point about the transition offense is a good one. He really helps increase the pace that Duke plays at. They're playing at 75 possessions per 40 minutes, and on the offensive end alone, their average possession length is just 14.8 seconds. That's an NBA caliber number. So he's already used to playing at the pace that NBA teams play at. That makes it an easier transition when going to the NBA. A lot of college teams play really slow. Like Virginia is only 60 possessions per 40 minutes, and a lot of teams are in the 65 to 70 range. But RJ's already used to playing at that quick pace, getting up the court. We touched on the motor. His motor on defense is most engaged when he has a chance to grab that defensive rebound and then run right up the court. But I think that ability to play at a quick pace is sometimes underrated in how a player will transition to the next level. It can be a tough adjustment for players that aren't conditioned to running up and down the court that quickly, and as far as stamina. And so I think that's something that will help ease his transition, will allow him to focus more so on the skill parts of his game rather than getting into NBA shape. But let's shift the discussion a little bit now towards our outlook for RJ. What type of role would you like to see him in? What type of team context? And generally, how highly do you regard him in this draft class? Let's throw this to Josh first. Not going to give you any time to think about it, Josh.
Oh, no. I was making a face. I was making a face when Eustacchio was like, how do you feel about him in this draft class? I do think that RJ has some currency as a tertiary attacker and ball handler on the NBA level. We've mentioned kind of briefly, not fully addressing it, but like his mentality. I'm wondering if he might need to be on an NBA team with somebody that he feels is definitely better than him for him to kind of accept and really fully embrace that kind of tertiary, secondary ball handler type role. If he's on a team with somebody who he thinks is, not as good as he thinks he is, I could see that potentially being problematic and maybe having some struggle for control of the offense when he's on the court with that player. I do think the mechanics would suggest that he'll be at least solid off ball. Maybe not his rookie year, but I think within his rookie scale contract, he'll be at least, league average-ish shooting wise, which will help open up things along with the better spacing on the NBA level. I think his body control, his handle, his mentality to attack at all times will allow him to see more opportunities of better quality in terms of his slashing on the NBA level, given better spacing and that sort of thing. But he'll also be dealing with better coached in general team defenses, smarter team defenders. And if he doesn't get over that bad habit of driving into the help, if he doesn't kind of open himself up more to trusting his teammates a little bit more, because as Levi and I have kind of talked about, he does show little glimpses of having good court awareness, knowing where his teammates are, and flashes of ability of putting passes on point in teammates' shooting pockets. If he can kind of open up his willingness to trust his teammates and, kind of accept that tertiary ball handler role, I think he could be a pretty good NBA player. He's not my personal type of player that I like very much, so I'm not as high on him in terms of draft stock value, if you will, as most people on the internet are. But I think there is a good NBA player in there. I think a lot of it's just going to depend on his mentality and his approach on the NBA level, though. What do you think, Connor?
Yeah, so I was kind of prepared for this coming in before I started doing prep, where I was really down on RJ. I think now, like Josh said, the biggest thing for me would be mentality, but specifically mentality to accept an off-ball role. I still think he has value handling, and I still think that he probably is most efficient as a transition handler and running a secondary pick and roll. But outside of that, I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of self-creation value from him. I'd like to see him with like a more dynamic on-ball point guard, like lead guard, but I don't think that the way the lottery looks like it's going to shake out, that's really going to happen. I mean, it'd probably be really nice if like the Wizards came in like third or fourth or something and were able to get him, but that's probably not likely. So, I think that he's going to be an off-ball guy, though, offensively, and I think he's going to be a guy that he's going to need a shot, like Levi said, so he can sort of attack off the dribble, but specifically spotting up where he can get to the rim with really long stride lengths, making up for his lack of burst. And then I also think, like I said, we talked about coming off curls, pin downs, DHOs, all that stuff. I think that really ties into his off ball value at the next level. And then defensively, I think he's never going to be a plus team defender, and that's going to be something that I think most people are going to come to terms with pretty fast, where he's not going to make a huge impact in that area. But I think on ball, he could be a pretty switchable defender. I mean, he could switch like to both wing positions and maybe some guards, depending on how dynamic the ball handler is, really. But overall, I think that RJ's probably should be top five in my opinion, despite the team value concerns, if he is willing to embrace a team value role.
How about you, Levi? What do you think?
You guys did a great job. I think to kind of put it in a nutshell, in a better world, RJ Barrett turns out to be a slasher who could help space the floor, or a slasher who can help create for others. In a perfect world, he's both. So, Eustacchio, you once described this draft class as extremely high variance. I think that's spot on, and I think he's one of the poster childs for why this draft is that way. Um, Obviously, he has some great physical tools and his ability to attack. It excites me to see him at the pro level because I want to see what he can do with a different offensive scheme and with a little bit better floor spacing and what he can do in the open floor there. But to me, it's always going to come down to what's his consistency as a perimeter shooter and what's his decision making when he's attacking off the bounce. Because you can almost assure yourself that he's going to get opportunities to test it, to prove it from the perimeter. And you can almost assure yourself that when he touches the ball, he's going to attack the rim. So those two things for me are really going to tell the story, a couple years from now on where he's at and what kind of value he brings his future franchise.
Yeah, I think you guys did a really good job of summing up what situations he could and could not succeed in. And I think for me, if I were going to build around RJ, I would really try to make a point of emphasis of putting him in favorable situations to attack, trying to acquire another tall creator so that you can have those big lineups out there. He can attack against smaller players. Like if you look at the lottery right now, maybe even a place like Detroit where he could be paired with Blake Griffin, and then you could get really creative with the lineups that you use. And I think for him to reach his upside, he has to be either like a primary scorer or option 1B, because that's where he's most engaged, is on ball offense. It's the part of the game that he's drawn to clearly. And so putting him in a situation where he can be successful in that will be the best chance of extracting that value from him. The question is whether he's really the guy you want to anchor your organization to in that role. I probably would not want to put that much stock into him becoming a high-level scorer and efficient. The key to an efficient team offense, but that possibility is there, and I am intrigued about how he will develop long-term. It's a career I'll be following closely to see whether it works at the next level, whether he's able to make the adjustments needed to take advantage of the incredible defensive attention he draws. There's great tools there. There's great pieces, but I have a hard time seeing it all come together. So for me, he's probably in the latter half of the lottery. He's still a lottery pick. He's still a valuable player with a lot of potential, but I just don't quite see it in the 2 through 5 range that he's being projected at around the web right now. So let's shift gears now and take a look at another very unique prospect, Bol Bol out of Oregon. And Connor, why don't you give us just a quick overview of what his game is like?
Yeah, so Bol Bol, sort of minute, obviously, very long, 7'2", also very skinny. One of the biggest things with him is his shooting ability. He's a really great shooter and has really strong shooting numbers for a guard at 7'2", and was one of the better shooters in college basketball this year before he got hurt. Not necessarily percentage wise per se, but more or less like synergy play types. Like I think his spot up was 98%, and most of those came off of him just really catching and shooting. Overall, Bol Bol has a lot of defensive concerns and also a lot of offensive concerns, which makes him such an interesting player, and concerns and a lot of different varying opinions on what his role will be, even down to his position at the next level. And I think there's a lot of stuff that we needed to see from Bol Bol that unfortunately we will not see since he is hurt and will not be coming back this season, I believe. So that is really disappointing. And I think that we wanted to start with his on-ball stuff. So, Josh, I'm gonna throw to you the on-ball stuff so we could get it on with it, and just what you think specifically about his on-ball game and what you value in it.
Yeah. The thing that sticks out to me the most on ball is actually his passing. He's a very willing, capable, and skilled passer, especially for someone his size. I wouldn't say that he's, the type that makes next level reads or highly anticipatory reads where he's going to thread the pass through a small window right as his teammate is about to reach that point. And like, he's not making those types of passes, but the passes he makes are very decisive. They're very crisp passes. And I think that's when you have somebody at his size with his shooting ability, the attention that's going to draw defensively, and you combine that with his willingness and his ability to pass, I think that makes him a very, very interesting and intriguing prospect from a kind of off-ball standpoint, and how he can elevate a team's offense without necessarily having to be on ball per se. He also obviously shoots well off the dribble on ball. He's got very good shot mechanics. He's got good touch on his floaters. Finishing in the post, I wouldn't say he's really got particularly great moves or anything down there, but with his length and his touch, it's really hard to contest him very strongly in that scenario. Levi, what are your thoughts on Bol Bol in terms of his offense, both on ball and off?
So you hit on the passing, and I totally agree with you. I think anytime that then in his 9 games he played, anytime he saw a zone off or zone defense, he was really effective out of the high post. Obviously, he's got some vision. He can see over the vast majority of defenders, but he made some sharp passes, and that was pretty impressive. The thing that stood out for me was really his ball handling. I mean, it's just you don't see many players his size move the way he does. You mentioned that it's not a huge sample size of it, but he did show flashes of even a little pull up and being able to shoot off the bounce, which is seeing him do it. He looked shockingly fluid with the ball in his hands, and so I was impressed by that. He doesn't have very advanced post moves, but I will say that he does a good job of going to just his little turnaround jumper that he can get off on pretty much anybody. And he's got good touch down there. And then the other thing I saw him do was his little baby hook. He does a good job of when he's playing against more physical defenders that are trying to take his space away, he gets his left shoulder right into their face, and he's able to just elevate over them with his length. So definitely not a polished post-scoring presence. I wouldn't say that, but his passing, his ball handling, he's a really exciting player to watch. I was really high on him, and I'm very bummed about the injury. But, the ball handling and passing for me were the top 2.
Yeah, so I just wanted to get in on the on ball stuff real quick and briefly get into the off ball too. So I think that his ball handling, like Levi pointed out, is something that's very intriguing, specifically because it's not something that we see out of a lot of guys his size. I'm still remains to be seen, to me at least, where he applies it on the offensive end of the floor, and particularly in the half court outside of making 1 to 2 dribble pull ups. I don't really think he has sort of the burst attacking spot up off the dribble where even though he does have great length, since he's so frail, it's going to be really hard for him to finish around the defenders. And he's not very strong finishing off the dribble either, which makes sense. But even just not necessarily going up strong, which is something that you could always do, even if you are a smaller player. I think he does show some enough ball handling to be a transition handler. You guys talked about the passing. a lot of high post stuff because he's zoned a lot, like Levi talked about. Saw him against Syracuse. Iowa went to zone 2 on him. A lot of high low stuff. Read the weak side out of the post well too. So I think that's pretty encouraging. I'd like to see it more. Sort of attacking off the dribble, like we said, because his shooting ability is so strong, especially off the catch, that he's going to be a guy that will have the opportunity to attack closeouts. So being able to read defenders once attacking a closeout is a big part of his game on the offensive level. And then finishing in the post, I just wanted to hit on briefly where, to me, I'm a little concerned about, and Levi touched on his jump hook, which I do really like a lot because he's so long and has such a long wingspan and standing reach that's going to be really hard to block no matter what. But overall, I think that his post game is something that I'm not a huge fan of because it's going to be very hard for him to get positioning at the next level. And it's also going to be extremely hard for him to consistently get that sort of turnaround jumper off at the next level, I feel, because even though he does have really good shot mechanics, he does have a pretty low release on his shot, which doesn't necessarily matter if you're going up against like the 6'8" big guy from Iowa or San Diego or all the other mid-major teams they played this season. But I think it really matters at the next level when you're going to be going against guys like Embiid and Drummond and guys that can really bump you off your spots when you're trying to get to that fadeaway two in the post, which is something that is a little bit concerning to me. But and then briefly, just screening too. I think we all know he doesn't really add a lot of value as a screener. I mean, you can't. It's hard to set a screen and create separation for a guard at that size. Um, Other than that, I mean, I don't really have much. Eustachio, did you have anything that you wanted to hit on?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how his offense may project to the next level. He's sort of this unique inside-outside threat where he can uh, determine his shot selection based on the type of player he's playing against more interior, stronger players. He can step out and hit the jump shots, draw them away from the paint. Uh, Remove the rim protector so that his guards can attack. But he's also capable of operating in that high post area on the elbow, cutting to the rim, and facilitating the team offense. Now, his ball handling and his passing, they're solid. I don't think he's going to be like isolating or running pick and rolls or anything, but has good enough of a handle to attack a closeout, which is important. Many bigs that shoot are just stationary shooters. If they don't get their shot off, they just swing the ball to the next guy. But Bol can actually put it on the floor and attack the rim. And that's a useful skill for a big man. And his passing, he's like Josh said, he's not really creating great looks for people, but he's keeping the team offense moving, and that's important. And so I think he's represents a very unique player. There's not a lot of guys that really have this type of inside outside potential. He's a 72% finisher around the rim on a really high volume. I think he's scoring 30.5 points per 75 possessions in his brief stint in college basketball. Most of those points came at the rim, but also he was good in mid-range, 3-point range. It's a potentially unique offensive weapon. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see how NBA teams try to utilize that, whether they try to match him up with fives or fours or what have you. But Connor's waving his arm, so I'm going to toss it back to him now.
No, I just wanted to say here because I think that I was really the only one that sort of brought up his finishing, where I think that his numbers are a little misleading to me, specifically finishing at the rim, where he's so tall that he's bound to get offensive rebounds, especially with a lot of the teams they've played, and especially playing against Syracuse, even with the most elite physical talent out of anybody at those schools, getting rebounds out of his zone as well. So I think that a lot of his numbers at the rim just generally come off putbacks, which I'm not saying that he's not going to have that value at the next level because he's still 7'2", but it's definitely going to be a lot harder. And I don't think that that necessarily translates to him finishing at a high rate at the next level, specifically in the half court when we're not just talking about putbacks or even attacking off the dribble or like on a closeout.
I don't think he can really create those shots for himself well, but I think within the scope of a team offense, he'll find them, especially if he's like third or fourth option in a team offense and he has a dynamic guard that's able to draw two defenders. I mean, he's just such a big target that I think with that length, he'll find fairly efficient baskets. But yeah, I like the post-up volume is going to go way down, of course. That's every big man transitioning from college to the pros, but it'll be different. But I mean, 7'2" is 7'2". He has a 9'6" standing reach on the ground. So I don't know. It's tough to see because he's not strong, but he's incredibly long. I don't know. We'll see. But let's move along.
I wasn't generally talking about like post ups though, as much as I was talking about just finishing. Because like you said, like specifically, and I'm just asking like specifically, like you said, like a dynamic guard drawing in like two defenders. Wouldn't that just necessarily be like any big guy though? That's like 7 foot. Like, I mean, I get the length concern. I get the length too, but like to me, that's just like you're supposed to finish those opportunities, you know.
You're supposed to, but it's going to happen a lot more consistently with a guy that's 7'2" than a guy that's 6'10", 6'11". And I mean, being able to catch the ball with his reach at 9'6" is different than a guy who has to try to catch the ball on his way up and still finish. I think he'll be really good on cuts. Like it's not just putbacks. He's high PPP on cuts, 1.3 points per possession. He didn't have a lot of roll man possessions, but I think within the way that NBA teams play offense, how that differs from Oregon, I think we'll see a lot more of that. Even with him in the pick and roll, he won't be an active screen setter, but slipping the pick, he'll be a threat, drawing defenders to the rim. Let's throw this to Josh. He has some thoughts.
My only thought as an Oregonian is I just want to make sure we know that it's Oregon. Just throwing that out there because it's a little pet peeve of all Oregonians. Anyway, back to you.
That's all I had on his offense. So let's shift the focus now to his defense. He's obviously very long, blocks a lot of shots, but outside of that, what type of defensive impact do you see him making, Levi?
That's the big question. Obviously, elite shot altering potential, right? For me, really on both sides of the ball, his biggest thing is space. When he has space to utilize length, both of his strides and both of his wingspan, he can be really effective. As soon as there's contact and space is limited, it negates a lot of what his physical tools and strengths are. So I think he has a somewhat decent motor where he does look to chase and alter shots. I think he also has a slow reaction time. There's been some really interesting flashes of him guarding the ball on the perimeter where he actually has had success into not only forcing tough contested pull-ups, but actually blocking some of these very shots. His thing is the more recognition he has and awareness that he has of his strengths and limitations physically, the better he is going to be. So when he starts at a standstill situation with the offensive player, when they're on an even playing field in regards to momentum, and he establishes himself at a safe distance for him where his length can disrupt rhythm jumpers, but his feet are agile enough to keep him in front and close off lanes, he's actually pretty impressive. It's only been a small couple spurts or a couple examples, but in those examples, I think there's a lot to be excited about with him. But when he's not, when the offensive player has a head full of steam or they're at a advantage when it comes to momentum, he can really struggle in closeout scenarios. Oftentimes, he just concedes wide open lanes or stumbles awkwardly into a foul, or just puts his team defense at a disadvantage right away. But when he gets a chance to establish his feet, he's such an intriguing prospect because I don't know how much I could speak to his switchability, but there is some chances where if he's in emergency switch scenarios that he can actually be effective. I mean, he's no Kevin Love on Steph Curry, but it'll be I think it'll be interesting to watch. So his reaction time not great, but in space, and as he continues to get awareness about where his strength is and where his happy place is, so to speak, on closeouts, he can be pretty effective.
Josh, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, so defensively, it's interesting with him because once again, the capital of being able to alter shots and deter shots, not even necessarily like blocking or altering shots, but the fact of him being even kind of somewhat in the area should deter a decent percentage of shot attempts in the first place. Like Levi said, one of the things I find really interesting about him is on the perimeter. We've seen some situations where on the perimeter, once again, if it's kind of standstill, nobody has a momentum advantage type scenario like Levi mentioned, Bol Bol is good enough with his feet to be able to play, and with his length, he's able to play kind of a step further back than most players would, which kind of negates some of the concern of, better ball handlers attacking him, while still being able to contest, deter, alter the shot if they do go to the dribble pull-up, which once again, the dribble pull-up's one of the tougher shots in all of basketball too. So if he's kind of dissuading them from driving into him and kind of enticing them to take that dribble pull-up, and he's still able to contest it, I think there is some equity for him in terms of perimeter defense, even on the NBA level, once again with the caveat that Levi made in terms of momentum and stuff. Like if he's, switching on to Kyle Korver or Klay Thompson types coming off of screens, like that probably isn't going to work all that great. But if it's a scenario where it's kind of more of a ISO type thing, I think he'll be solid. And I think it'll be interesting to see where NBA teams place him, both defensively and offensively, in terms of, is he going to play more like the traditional big type role on defense, or might we see him play maybe a more interesting approach like how Indiana utilizes Oladipo, more of like a free safety type approach where, with his length and his general mobility for his size, he can kind of roam a little bit and be kind of a help defender as opposed to just a stuck in the paint waiting to block shot type thing. Connor, what are your thoughts on defense? And then maybe you can transition us into discussing his like tools and intelligence.
Yeah, so I guess I could kind of tie those all into one for the most part. For me, defensively, I think I agree with a lot of what Levi and you said, specifically about him being very comfortable on the perimeter, especially at his size and his length, sort of being the outlier for that reason why. To me, I think that the biggest thing, like you said, is his is just altering shots with his length. Normally, in the first few Oregon games, they played 2-3 with Bol in the middle, and then they shifted in the Houston game where they put Kenny Wooten in the middle and they put Bol on the perimeter, and you saw how much more effective that was with him just being able to get out onto guys and spot up shooters and contest shots. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why he's been so effective as a spot up defender. Going and transitioning into his tools, I would say that I'm probably a lot lower on Bol's tools than most are. I'm not, to me, when I think frame specifically, I just think of like the ability to add mass. And to me, that's not something that's really there for Bol. I don't think his body really projects well to putting on a lot more weight. Uh, I'm not a huge fan of his north-south speed either, or east-west, really. I think his long strides more or less help him defending on the perimeter than really like having extremely quick feet. And then his leaping ability is it's okay. I mean, he's not a very explosive leaper, but I don't think it's something that's gonna really kill him at the next level either. Though, to me, the biggest thing it would be his frame and just how concerning that is, obviously, and also specifically talking about his intelligence. I think that he's actually pretty intelligent. I think that he sort of knows what he's doing as a passer, like we talked about, and situational awareness has been good to me, at least as sort of the rim protector when he has to be. And Josh, did you have any thoughts on intelligence or tools at all?
Intelligence wise, I find him to be pretty solid. Nothing really stands out to me, positive or negative necessarily. Once again, he does show solid court awareness in terms of his passing, but not necessarily elite or particularly high level shot awareness. And then when it comes to the frame, my only real concerns about this, and I'll throw it to Eustacchio after this because I know he's got different perspective on his frame than Connor and I do, but I'm not so sure that you would even necessarily want him to put on too much more weight, even if his frame looks like it would be able to, which I don't think it does look like it would be able to put on more weight. So he's out. He only played 9 games this season because of a stress fracture in his foot at only 235 pounds, which I know sounds like a lot to us. Like if I was 235, I'd be like, dang. But for somebody 7'2", 235, you can see how slim he looks, how slender he looks. And the fact that he's already got a stress fracture in his foot at that size, if I'm an NBA team, I'm concerned with the idea of trying to put more weight on him. I'd probably instead try to focus on making sure that he's got really strong core and try to work with that more. But Eustacchio, I know you have different opinion on his frame than Connor and I do. So why don't you red team us a little bit?
So the concerns about his ability to add weight, that's legitimate. The injury concerns with the stress fracture in his left foot already, that could become a persistent issue. Foot injuries, can they support his frame? But at the same time, I mean, he's 7'2", 7'6" wingspan, 9'6" standing reach. Rudy Gobert has a 9'7" standing reach, just for context. I mean, that's huge. Most centers were looking at 9'1", 9'2", maybe 9'3". So he's got 3, 4, 5 extra inches on the normal starting NBA center. That's just makes a huge difference in the game of basketball. Moreover, he's fairly mobile for his size. I think he has really good body control, actually. I think our grades had him about average there, but I mean, the ratio of fouls to blocked shots is really stellar. There's not many freshmen that have that type of ratio. Anthony Davis, of course, was fantastic, out of this world, but short of that, Bol Bol is probably in the next tier of really good blocked shot to foul ratio as a freshman. Usually the fouls come down for older prospects, but that shows sort of his intelligence and his body control. But there's a couple of things I want to hit on quick before we wrap up with our outlook on Bol Bol. First, I want to throw it to Levi and just ask you about what you think of his speed, both north-south and east-west, because I think that mobility is a big factor in what he has the potential to become down the road. So what do you think of his mobility, Levi?
While his foot speed isn't great, his length gives him more mobility, right? He's able to close space pretty quickly. For me, when he's engaged, when he has a slight bend in his legs and he's ready to move defensively, that's when he's a force in protecting the paint and altering shots. He can be a little bit upright at times, and that's when he lacks that reaction time. But his length gives him – it's like the great equalizer, right? He's able to just close gaps that you didn't think were going to get closed. And so I think there's real potential there. And while I agree with you guys that the frame really – the one thing that's elite is size and length, right? Outside of that, it's pretty there's a lot of question marks there. I think that – while he might not be able to add a ton of size and pounds, I think he can definitely add strength. And so I think as that strength, especially lower body, comes into play, while it may not tip the scale significantly, I think it's going to give him a little bit more reaction time, a little bit more balance, a little bit more ability to play through contact and get to spots. So I know he's a risk, but I'm actually a little bit higher on his mobility than most.
Great points, Levi. Now, the other thing I want to hit on is his rebounding, specifically on the defensive side, because that the strength issues there and his height, the high center of gravity, could become an issue there. So let's throw that to Connor. What do you think about his ability to rebound to clean the defensive glass long term?
To me, I'm not a huge fan of it. I think we've talked about this before in the Slack channel, actually, where he hasn't had a really strong defensive rebounding game against any high major team that he's played so far. I mean, he's not going to play anybody else, but I mean, we have 4 defensive rebounds against Iowa, 4 defensive rebounds against Syracuse, and 6 defensive rebounds against Houston. I mean, to me, that's something where he's not going to add a lot of value. The significance of defensive rebounding is still something that I got to sort of sort out in my own personal theories, and since that was brought up to me the last episode, I believe. But overall, I don't think he's really going to give you too much defensive rebounding because he's not a very explosive leaper. He's not somebody that's really going to get off a box out or not get off a box out. I'm sorry. Be able to box out consistently with his size. It's going to be very easy for the offensive player to get off of him, and I think that that's just something that we're really going to have to deal with. I mean, if he's not on the side that the rebound comes on, there's no way he's going to be mobile enough to grab it or be strong enough to clear space for somebody else to grab it. I think it's just going to be, if it comes to him, it comes to him. He should have good rebounding games per se, but not necessarily a strong rebounding profile for a whole season.
Yeah, I think you hit on an important point there because he's so long, he'll get his own share of rebounds probably over the course of the season, but his team impact in that regard, if he's playing the 5, he's not going to be able to box out the opposing center. So the opposing team is going to have a good offensive rebounding rate against that. If you move him over to the 4, maybe that's a little bit more viable from a team perspective on the glass. One point I just wanted to hit on quick, I do have some concerns about his potential to play with pace. Oregon was pretty slow, and so transitioning to the NBA in that regard, a faster pace may be a little problematic for him. But just to keep this within a somewhat reasonable time frame, let's wrap up by going to Outlook next. And let's start with Josh, then Levi, then Connor, and back to me. So, Josh, what are your thoughts about his outlook long term?
It'll be interesting to see more like pick and roll man usage on the NBA level, which primarily take the form of a pick and pop, I imagine. While he's incredibly long, he's not a major leaper. The few times they try to throw him alley-oops in the games that I saw, he tended to bobble them a little bit. So I don't think he represents a strong dive guy lob threat per se. But I think there's a lot of potential there as a pick and pop threat. And also I personally would like to see him in more actions kind of meant for wings in terms of trying to free him up for shots, because I think he's like the big thing offensively for him is he's got really good touch. And I think at that size, if you're running actions to actually get him open, I think it'd be really tough, even on the NBA level, for teams to really defend that to a very significant degree. So I'm intrigued to see how he's utilized. Personally, I would kind of, in essence, run him actions for a 3, but I'd probably play him as the 4 defensively. In large part due to the team related stuff that you kind of touched on, you and Connor, in regards to the rebounding. I think at a shooting 4 type role for him is probably the best way to maximize the lineup around him. Not necessarily building around him, but, maximizing the utility of the overall lineup with him on the court.
Great stuff. How about you, Levi? What do you think about him long term?
Man, big men and foot injuries scare me more than efficient shot charts scare Mark Jackson. It was before pre-injury, man. I was so sold on top 5, even top 3, just because when you look at it, really, he plays the last position. If he's coming in as a center, he plays the last position where in the NBA, we don't view it as an absolute necessity to be able to stretch the floor. Right? Fair? So the fact that he can do that and even offer some he has a really good feel for the game. The way he passes the ball, he sees the open man. He doesn't force the issue. I understand that, there's a lot of question marks about his frame and just overall his physical ability and how it can translate to the pro game. But to me, there was so much upside that of what he can bring with just his floor spacing, his passing, and even some ability to handle the ball, albeit in a limited fashion. The risk was worth the reward, for me. I was really, really high on him, and I still am. I mean, the foot injury is significant, but I think that if I'm a team and he's anywhere at the back end of the top 10, I'm still willing to take the leap, just because, again, the upside to me, we talked earlier about the high variance of this draft class. I think the 2 guys we talked about tonight are right up there, along with anybody else, in terms of just, well, they could be really good or they could be completely forgotten in a matter of years. So I love his potential offensively. I think that defensively he has true potential to be a game-changing shot alter in the paint. Obviously, there will have to be some scheming and how to keep him in a position where he can be successful. At Oregon, they played a zone when he was in there, and they did a great job keeping him in the paint. But to me, it comes down to just 2 things. It's health and not so much size, but strength. If he can add strength and he can stay healthy, I think he can be really special.
Great stuff, Levi. Thanks. How about you, Connor? What do you think about him?
Yeah, so to me, I think I'm gonna go. I think Bol Bol to me is more of a wing than necessarily a 4 or big. I don't think he's ever gonna be somebody that sort of gives you the assets that you want out of a big man. He's not going to be somebody that gives you separation, that can create separation for guards on screens. He's not going to be somebody that's going to roll to the rim hard and finish over the defense. I just don't think that's really in his game. Some of it being physical attributes lacking, of course, but the other part of it to me is really just me being lower on his overall mobility. Where while he is mobile at that size, I mean, it's hard to be that quick or that strong at his with his frame. So that's my biggest concern of how he can't really add value as a big man at the next level where he should add value. I think that he 100%, if you want to play him as a big man, he spaces the floor. I mean, that's what he's going to do as a big man. But I don't think that's probably realistic unless you have a specific forward next to him that can sort of handle those big man traits like rolling to the rim and providing vertical spacing, and being able to create separation for guards with his screening ability. So to me, Bol is more of a wing. I'm not sure because Josh briefly talked about like running him off wing actions. I think we've seen him flash like a shot off movement maybe once, but to me, that's not something that's really going to be a strength for him. To me, I have a hard time seeing him as much more than really just a floor spacing threat at the wing position that can sort of attack with a 1 to 2 dribble pull up off the dribble, and maybe occasionally if the floor is spaced out enough and there's not much rim protection, he can finish at the rim. To me, defensively too, I'm not sure quite how switchable he will be. I think, like we talked about, he definitely has the ability to probably do it with less dynamic creators, but I think his high hips really hurt him changing direction and make it very hard for him to change directions. Uh, and then I'm not sure. I would want him as a rim protector really either, because I know everyone wants to talk about like the post ups, the dying play type or whatever, and it's a dying breed. But at the same time, I still find it extremely, extremely hard to believe that like if I got like Andre Drummond or Joel Embiid on Bulls guarding them, I find it really hard to believe that some coach isn't just going to eat that alive. And maybe it's not in the regular season, but I think it'll definitely be in the playoffs where you see like sort of almost like a reverse Isaiah Thomas thing where you specifically remember like coaches were hunting to post Isaiah Thomas up. Specifically, one that I remember was when he played for the Celtics with the Wizards. I mean, the Wizards consistently posted John Wall up until the Celtics took Thomas out of the game. So I think that that's something that we need to take into account too. Is like maybe that's not something that we'll see happen immediately, but it's something that you could see happen in the postseason. And if you're not really projecting a player to be playable in the postseason, if you see it that way, I'm not saying you have to, but if you see it that way, it's something to definitely take into consideration. So I think I'm a lot lower on Bol than most people, but I'd probably take him sort of like they said, there's still an upside there. So I'd probably say like the back end of the lottery, probably around like 12 to 14.
Some good points there, Connor, and I appreciate your willing to go against the consensus a little bit on that. I have a different perspective, though. I agree that he doesn't bring the skills of a traditional big, but I view that as an opportunity rather than a problem. It allows you to play the game in a different way than every other team in the league is going to approach it. You can use him to space the floor to play 5 out, or you can run 1-4 or 1-3 pick and rolls. You don't have to utilize the traditional 1-5 pick and roll so much, but you can use him as that wing to space the floor, to attack closeouts, to cut to the rim. And I think that between his shooting ability, I would play him at the 5, first of all, because I think the combination of his shooting and his shot blocking there, that's where you're going to extract the most value. Those are his outlier skills. Yes, there are flaws with him there. He is weak in the post, but if the opposing team is going to run their offense through the posts, I would encourage that. If you want to go one-on-one against a guy with a 9'6" standing reach and think you're going to produce good team offense better than my 5-out offense on the other end, go ahead, try it. I think that the creativity that he could potentially add to his NBA team, I don't know. It's just so unique, and I think his upside is outside of the Zion tier, perhaps the highest in this class. For me, I would put him in the 2 through 5 tier. I think you need the right team fit. That's a fair concern. Something like Atlanta might work really well next to John Collins, who's a rim runner at the power forward position. I think that could be a good fit, but that upside, there's just not many other players that share it in this class. So I'm higher on him than most, but I think we offered some diverse and unique perspectives in breaking down these players. And so next week, we're going to come back and examine 2 more very interesting prospects, DeAndre Hunter and Kelton Johnson. We'll have Alex West back for that one, hopefully. And so you can look forward to that next week. But we want to thank everyone on this podcast, Levi, our guest, especially. You brought some great stuff today, Levi. Follow him at Levi Wenrich on Twitter. Anything we can look forward to from you in the coming days, Levi?
Hey, just appreciate the time here and had a lot of fun today. So thank you guys for having me. Just looking forward to our draft guide that's coming out soon. So looking forward to that.
Awesome. And make sure to check out his videos on RJ Barrett and Bol Bol on Twitter. Josh Earl, follow him at 2RedJEarl. And always be on the lookout for his stuff on his site, contextualscouting.com. He runs classes, I believe every 2 months they start, where he helps people out with learning the ropes of synergy and helping them get into the video side of the basketball industry. And then Connor, our prodigy Connor, at Harr Connor on Twitter. You have anything coming up, Connor?
Yeah, I'm like in the mix of trying to still get a big board done and the draft guide. It's kind of hard to balance both, but it's all good. I'm very tired, so you'll be expecting deep sleep from me after this.
Sounds good. Yeah, so we're all cramming for the draft guide, which will be coming up in hopefully 2 weeks or so. So be on the lookout for that. And until next time, thank you for listening to the Red Team Draft Podcast.